sure hope you're there.
I'm
Take
here.
it away. Okay,
Dana, good to see you guys. Nice show. This is the first handoff. I like it. First of many.
Right. We can't see you.
Well done.
Where are you, Brett?
I'm right here.
Oh,
we'll take over. Thank you, guys. So the first charges are in as the special counsel announces his first indictments and a guilty plea in the investigation into Russian collusion during the 2016 election. Where does it all go from here? This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. 5 months after he was first appointed, special counsel Robert Mueller revealed his team's first guilty plea related to the Russia investigation. This as two former Trump campaign officials pled not guilty today to a dozen counts, including conspiracy against the United States. One of those two men is Paul Manafort, the president's former campaign manager, and certainly one of the biggest names to be facing criminal charges. But it's another, less recognizable name that could potentially pose a bigger problem for the president and his people. We have Fox team coverage. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts looks at the reaction coming out of the Oval Office today and the White House. Senior political analyst Britt Hume with the political implications and analysis. But we begin with Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen outside District Court. Good evening, James.
Brett, good evening. This is already being described by some media outlets as the worst day yet for the Trump presidency. But in all the action here in federal court today, Donald Trump was far removed from the allegations and confessions that represent the first landmark in the special counsel's investigation.
Any reaction, Mr. Manafort?
A few hours after former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort surrendered to the FBI, he and longtime associate Rick Gates appeared before magistrate judge Deborah Robinson in federal district court, where each pleaded not guilty to 12 counts of financial crimes in an indictment unsealed by the Office of Special Counsel Robert Mueller. The indictment alleged that while lobbying for Ukrainian interests from 2006 through 2015, Manafort and Gates laundered $75 million through offshore companies and bank accounts, and allegedly took steps as late as February to continue concealing millions in unreported income.
That President Donald Trump was correct. There is no evidence that Mr. Manafort or the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government. The second thing about this indictment that I myself find most ridiculous is a claim that maintaining offshore accounts to bring all your funds into the United States as a scheme to conceal from the United States government is ridiculous.
Manafort was released on $10 million bond, Gates $5 million, due for payment if they fail to appear for court proceedings or leave their homes for any reason other than legal or medical appointments or religious worship. Analysts noted that the charges are unrelated to the Russia collusion angle that Mueller's team was originally established to investigate.
What the special prosecutor is likely doing here is putting pressure on someone he knows was at the center or feels like was at the center of this relationship with Russia, and use criminal charges as a way of trying to get cooperation from Manafort.
Mueller also unsealed a guilty plea entered over 3 weeks ago by George Papadopoulos, a former foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. Questioned by FBI agents 1 week after the inauguration, Papadopoulos lied about the timing and circumstances under which he made contact with various foreign nationals last year, people he believed to be well connected inside the Kremlin.
He was a relatively junior official, so again, how much closer it brings it to the White House depends on what actually happened.
Papadopoulos signed a summary of events that stated the professor told defendant Papadopoulos, as defendant Papadopoulos later described to the FBI, that they, meaning the Russians, have dirt on her, meaning Hillary Clinton. The Russians had emails of Clinton. They have thousands of emails. However, the documents indicate the Trump campaign rebuffed this effort by the Russians, working through Papadopoulos to set up a meeting with the candidate himself. An unnamed senior campaign official was quoted in the summary as having emailed a colleague, "We need someone to communicate that DT, meaning Donald Trump, is not doing these trips."
The president, it's in his best interest, in my view, to ensure that Mueller can wrap this investigation up quickly. The more this gets dragged out, the more you see people connected to the campaign being brought in for questioning under oath.
I spoke this morning with someone who spoke to Paul Manafort on the phone twice on Saturday, and as late as Saturday evening, Manafort didn't believe he was going to be indicted. As for his business associate, Rick Gates, he was represented at the arraignment today by a public defender because, according to Gates' attorney, he didn't receive enough advance warning about his indictment to appear with his own attorney. Brett?
James Rosen outside the courthouse. James, thank you. President Trump remained defiant today, if only on Twitter, reasserting there was no collusion with Russia and that the feds should instead focus their investigation on Democrats. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us from the North Lawn with that part of the story. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. From the very beginning, President Trump has insisted that his campaign did not collude with Russia to try to influence the outcome of the U.S. election. If there was collusion, any evidence of that or even an allegation of it has yet to be revealed by the special counsel. President Trump pushed back hard against any notion that the Manafort-Gates indictment had any trail to him or his campaign, tweeting this morning, quote, "Sorry, but this is years ago, before Paul Manafort was part of the Trump campaign. But why are crooked Hillary and the Dems the focus? Also, there is no collusion." In the daily briefing, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders not only sought to distance the White House from Manafort, but also downplayed his role, ignoring the fact he was campaign chairman for 3 months.
Today's announcement has nothing to do with the president, has nothing to do with the president's campaign or campaign activity. Paul Manafort was brought in to lead the delegate process, which he did, and was dismissed not too long after that.
The Democratic leader.
On Capitol Hill, Democrats wasted no time in playing connect the dots.
What we know now is that an alleged unregistered foreign agent was given the chairmanship of a campaign for the presidency of the United States, and with it, untold influence on a future president and his party.
The White House was also aggressively distancing itself from George Papadopoulos, who served as an unpaid volunteer in the president's Foreign Policy Council and attended at least one meeting with then-candidate Donald Trump and Senator Jeff Sessions. The press secretary insisted Papadopoulos was doing no outreach to Russia at the campaign's request.
Can you explain what happened with his outreach?
He reached out and nothing happened beyond that, which I think shows, one, his level of importance in the campaign, and two, shows what little role he had within coordinating anything officially for the campaign.
Sources tell Fox News that Trump campaign officials were perplexed by Papadopoulos' outreach to Russia, that he had been hired for his expertise on Greece. Sources familiar with the president's legal team say the White House is unconcerned by the guilty plea. It was evidence provided by the White House, they say, emails that led to Papadopoulos' prosecution. Still, the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee fired a sharp warning shot across the president's bow today. In a statement, Mark Warner saying issuing pardons to any of his associates or to himself would be unacceptable and result in immediate bipartisan action by Congress. The White House today did not rule out the possibility that the president could, at some point, possibly pardon one or more of the defendants in this case. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, though, saying it's far too early to make such a determination and that things need to play out before they even begin to talk about that. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thanks. For more analysis on today's developments, we turn to senior political analyst Britt Hume. Good evening, Britt. Your thoughts?
Hi, Brett. Well, it's not a good day when your former campaign chairman, former campaign manager, is indicted on federal charges. However, the good news for the Trump team and for the president himself is that there's no indication that these charges have anything really to do with the Trump campaign. The Papadopoulos matter would seem to be more serious, since this was about what he did while apparently an advisor of some stripe to the Trump campaign. But it does appear from what's in the charges and what else has been reported about Papadopoulos and his attempts to establish communications between the Trump campaign and Russian officials is that they didn't really go anywhere. Now, maybe there's more to know about this. Maybe more will come out. But, from considering what were obviously the expectations of many in Washington, particularly those who were hoping that something would happen that would be devastating to the White House, that may yet come, but this wasn't it.
Right. You know, you've covered these kinds of investigations before where prosecutors go after someone and then ideally turn that person or use them. In this case with Papadopoulos, he was arrested in July and then just pled guilty in October. In the motion to seal all of the information around the arrest. It says this: premature disclosure of the fact of the defendant's arrest and the nature of the charges against him likely to be substantially prejudiced both the defendant and the government. Defendant has indicated that he's willing to cooperate with the government in its ongoing investigation into Russian efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. Public disclosure of the defendant's initial appearance, however, would significantly undermine his ability to serve as a proactive cooperator. Those two words at the end there, Britt, proactive cooperator, previously have meant as much as that person possibly wearing a wire in the investigation as it continues.
Well, Brett, I think that's all possibly true, but it's in the realm of speculation at the moment. And if we're kind of going on what we know now, and what happened today and what came out today, it would not appear to do any particularly serious damage. Now, more of that may come. I would also note today that we had this sudden and unexpected resignation of
Tony Podesta,
the head of the Podesta Group, who is John Podesta's brother from his lobbying firm, which we know from reporting by Tucker Carlson of our network and others, was working closely with Manafort during some of this period in question. So, you know, there may be more to come on that as well, and it bears watching. It's the resignation by itself. You know, it could have been for health reasons, for all we know, but it was sudden and unexpected, which makes you think that this is something to watch.
Yeah, Britt, as always, thank you. Is this the beginning or the end of the Mueller investigation? Let me know on Twitter at Bret Baier. You can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BretBaierSR. At this hour, the Secretaries of State and Defense are testifying before a Senate panel about the president's power to fight terrorism around the globe and efforts by Congress to weigh in. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is monitoring the hearing on the authorization for the use of military force, the AUMF. Joins us live with details. Good evening, Mike.
Brett, good evening. Now some lawmakers are saying is the time for a serious conversation about Congress's role in authorizing the use of military force with the nation facing serious threats. But top Trump administration officials say they do not need a new authorization.
Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Secretary of Defense James Mattis back on Capitol Hill for a late afternoon hearing before the Foreign Relations Committee.
Though a statement of continued congressional support would be welcome, a new AUMF is not legally required to address the continuing threat posed by al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and ISIS.
With some lawmakers saying the authorization for the use of military force, or AUMF, crafted in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, now being used in places like Niger, is dated.
I feel strongly that 16 years after the Congress authorized the 2001 so-called AUMF, our declaration of war against those based in Afghanistan who attacked New York and the United States on 9/11, that we have gone far afield from the scope of that initial authorization.
Virginia Democrat Senator Tim Kaine has been among those calling for lawmakers to do something about a state of war on, quote, autopilot.
It's time for Congress to finally revisit the authorization, which is badly out of date, and have a debate in full view of the American public.
A senior State Department official told Fox Tillerson would say if Congress wants to pursue a new AUMF, the Trump administration would want it to include no time constraints and no geographic restraints. The official noting that since ISIS strongholds are collapsing, ISIS fighters are moving. And since 9/11, the threats have morphed from al-Qaeda and the Taliban to ISIS and other affiliates or inspired groups.
I am concerned about the spread of ISIS throughout Africa. And that's going on, and that's part of it. And unfortunately, the threat is growing.
South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says Congress must be informed and has the power of the purse, but should not prevent others from doing their jobs.
Congress is not set up to be military commanders. 535 members of Congress don't sit down and designate what threats the nation faces.
The concern for the Trump administration is anything that ties the hands of the commander-in-chief. But Arizona Senator Jeff Flake noted just moments ago, not one member of the Foreign Relations panel was here 16 years ago, and suggests it's time for them to get on the record. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. A federal court is barring President Trump from changing the government's policy on transgenders in the military. President Trump announced in August he intended to reverse course on a 2016 policy that allowed troops to serve openly as transgender individuals. In making the ruling, the district judge said that transgender members of the military who had sued over the change were likely to win their lawsuit. Tonight, the U.S. Navy is investigating whether 2 SEAL team members took the life of a Green Beret in Mali. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin joins me live from the Pentagon with details in this case. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. 2 members of the Navy's elite SEAL Team 6 are being investigated by the Navy's Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, in the death of an Army Special Forces soldier found strangled in Mali back in June. The 2 SEALs were flown out of the West African country almost immediately and placed on administrative leave. A military medical examiner ruled homicide by asphyxiation killed 34-year-old Staff Sergeant Logan Melgar. In other words, somebody strangled him. Sergeant Melgar, a native of Lubbock, Texas, was assigned to the 3rd Special Forces Group, the same unit which lost 4 soldiers during an attack in Niger earlier this month. A veteran who had joined the Army in 2012 after graduating from Texas Tech University, he had served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Foul play was immediately suspected in Melgar's death, according to the New York Times, which first reported the investigation. His body was found unresponsive in U.S. Embassy housing on June 4th. The mission of the Green Berets and SEAL Team 6 are highly classified. SEAL Team 6 is one of the world's premier counterterrorism forces, part of the Pentagon's Joint Special Operations Command. It's the elite counter-terror unit, of course, responsible for killing Osama bin Laden back in 2011. NCIS confirmed to Fox News it has opened an investigation, Brett, but refused to offer more details. Brett?
And Jennifer, we're getting reports tonight of a new development in the Benghazi investigation. What can you tell us about that?
Officials tell me U.S. Special Operations Forces captured a 46-year-old militant alleged to have been involved in the deadly attacks on the U.S. diplomatic compound and CIA complex in Benghazi in 2012. U.S. commandos captured Mustafa al-Imam in Libya and are transporting him back to the United States, not to Guantanamo Bay. The Justice Department charged the suspect in a sealed indictment in 2015. The snatch and grab operation was approved by President Donald Trump. We're told the suspect had been observed by U.S. forces as far back as December 2012, Brett, but U.S. commandos had twice been told not to grab him, according to U.S. forces on the ground then. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. More on those indictments and that guilty plea coming up at the panel. Next, the corruption trial of a Democratic senator nears a close, and later a renewed protest among NFL players. What made most of the teams take a knee Sunday? Who was shot in the head during that search mission. The National Park Service is backing off plans to pay for a project honoring the legacy of the Black Panther Party after police groups complained to President Trump. The Park Service had pledged $98,000 to the University of California, Berkeley's project until the Fraternal Order of Police sent a letter to the president expressing shock that the Park Service would pay to honor a group associated with killing a park ranger. Attorneys for Democratic Senator Bob Menendez rested today after earlier being denied a mistrial in that case. Correspondent David Lee Miller has the latest from Newark.
When New Jersey Democratic Senator Robert Menendez arrived at federal court in Newark for day 27 of his bribery trial, his defense team was hoping for a legal long shot. Over the weekend, they filed motions asking Judge William Walls to grant a mistrial, or at least to consider putting into evidence defense exhibits the judge ruled inadmissible. Menendez's lawyers accused the judge of treating them unfairly after a defense witness was not permitted to testify last week, when the judge ruled his testimony would have been hearsay. In a 45-page motion, the defense said in part, quote, "The court has denied defendants fair and meaningful opportunities to present a complete defense to the prosecution's case." Menendez's lead attorney told the judge, quote, "We feel stifled." The prosecution responded by accusing the defense of trying to, quote, "confuse and distract the jury." Judge Walls denied the 2 defense motions. He has yet to rule on a third, asking for an acquittal on criminal charges related to campaign contributions Menendez received. The prosecution says they were a bribe, while the defense argues there was no explicit agreement of a quid pro quo between Menendez and his co-defendant, Miami eye doctor Salomon Melgen. Following the latest setbacks, the defense rested its case.
After 8 weeks, 50 witnesses, and hundreds of documents, I and my lawyers believe that this jury is ready to render a just verdict, and I am confident that it will be not guilty.
Tomorrow, the judge will review with attorneys the instructions he will give to the jury. Those instructions could make or break the prosecution's case in light of a recent Supreme Court decision that narrowly defines what it takes to convict a public official of bribery. Brett?
David Lee Miller in Newark. David Lee, thank you. For more on the Menendez case and other issues, we turn to the host of the new Fox News at Night, Shannon Bream. Good evening, Shannon.
Good evening,
Night
Brett.
one. I want to talk about Menendez first, and then I want to talk about your show in a bit. 8 weeks. I mean, the judge, it was kind of no nonsense. He didn't throw out the case early based on the Supreme Court Bob McDonald ruling. He didn't say it was a mistrial. The jury's going to get this case, and what are your thoughts?
What's going to be really critical is something that was touched on there, the fact that the jury instructions will be such a big deal because of that case last year with former Virginia Governor Bob McDonald, where the Supreme Court said, you know, if we went by some of these bribery laws, they're so vague that if you have a conversation or a cup of coffee with someone on the Hill, those kinds of things could get an elected official in trouble. So his attorneys are going to push really hard for the jury instructions to follow that, to say it's got to be super specific. Here, I'm giving you this gift in return for you making this phone call. They're saying, you know, if it's vague, then it can't count. So those jury instructions will be very important.
You picked a newsy day to start a news show tonight. With the Paul Manafort, Rick Gates, and then the Papadopoulos documents that the special counsel essentially released today. I know you read through those. As a lawyer, what struck you?
I think it's that one thing, that nugget that a lot of us have honed in on, this fact that Papadopoulos was arrested in July. That's weeks and weeks before we ever heard about any kind of actual charge and plea deal, which happened in early October. We're just now learning about it. But we see this interesting paragraph that comes from an unsealed part of the case file now that says essentially that he would cooperate with the government in its ongoing investigation into this whole Russia 2016 election, and that public disclosure of his initial appearance would significantly undermine his ability as a proactive cooperator. So a lot of people think that means he was helping the government during that time of his arrest until we ever learned anything about it. It's possible, some have speculated, was he wearing a wire? Was he doing something even more instructive to be around this team and to get information that may have been helpful for prosecuting other people?
Okay, the big show, 11 p.m. Eastern Time. What should we expect?
Well, tonight we are, of course, going to be covering this case in depth. We've got a former federal prosecutor who has worked with some of the Mueller team. She's got some very specific opinions about this case and the charges and what we've seen so far, where it goes from here. Senator Mike Lee is going to join us as well. He's on one of the Senate committees that is also pursuing the investigation into what happened with Russia. He has said to this point that the White House and the president have been very cooperative. So we'll ask him tonight about whether that continues to be the case and where those Senate investigations go from here.
And I'll be there too.
Yes, and of course Bret Baier will join us at 11 p.m. Eastern. We can't wait.
Excited. Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks.
Up next, another week, another NFL protest, but this one for a very different reason. First years with some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 11 in Los Angeles, where Kevin Spacey has apologized to actor Anthony Rapp, who accused the two-time Oscar winner of sexual misconduct in the past. In apologizing to Rapp, Spacey also publicly announced that he is gay. Fox 45 in Baltimore, where a police officer acquitted in the murder of Freddie Gray, faces a disciplinary trial in that case. Officer Caesar Goodson was the driver of that police van that transported Gray the day he suffered deadly spinal cord injuries. 2 other officers accepted disciplinary action, while 3 others are fighting the charges. And this is a live look at New York from our affiliate, Fox 5. The big story there tonight: hundreds of thousands lose power as a storm rips through the northeast. Wind gusts more than 70 miles per hour down trees and power lines. Flash flooding also reported in some areas as it moves through. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Sunday football became center stage once again for another act of defiance during the national anthem. National correspondent William LaJeunesse reports on what made nearly an entire NFL team drop to one knee this weekend.
The national anthem controversy isn't over. Sunday, Houston Texans players knelt not to protest racial injustice, but remarks by team owner Bob McNair.
We came together as a team and wanted to, send a message, and that's what we decided to do, and I'm going to stand by my brother.
Previously, the Texans were not a team that knelt during the anthem. That changed after it was reported that McNair said earlier this month at an owners' meeting in New York, quote, "We can't have the inmates running the prison." Houston players assume he was referring to them.
This is how you view us. This is, you get out of line, you're an inmate.
I'm proud of our city.
But the 79-year-old owner, who spoke earlier this year at the Super Bowl, apologized Saturday, saying his figure of speech was never meant to be taken literally. And, quote, "I was not referring to our players when I made a very regretful comment during the owners' meetings last week. I was referring to the relationship between the league office and team owners and how they have been making significant strategic decisions affecting our league without adequate input from ownership over the past 2 years."
The apology is not the atonement necessary for the grievance that has been created. So, Mr. McNair, you have to do more than apologize.
I don't think the comments were right, but I do think these NFL owners have a constitutional right to protect their business and their business interests.
As for that sentiment, McNair is not alone. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones is reportedly also not happy with Commissioner Roger Goodell's handling of the national anthem controversy. League officials canceled the meeting scheduled for today to discuss McNair's comments. Brett?
William, thank you. Stocks ended the day in the red. The Dow lost 85, the S&P 500 slid 8, the Nasdaq was off 2. News overseas, the Kim Jong-un regime claims it just wants to develop its space program. But the U.S. and its allies are not falling for it and making sure Pyongyang knows what it's up against ahead of President Trump's trip to Asia. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott reports.
North Korea heading for the skies but threatening war. Pyongyang announcing it will launch more peaceful satellites into space. The last time it claimed to have done that was in 2016. The U.S. says it's just a cover for the Kim Jong-un regime to develop long-range ballistic missiles with a stated aim of hitting the United States with a nuclear bomb.
The simple fact that the North Korean regime now has the ability to strike the American heartland, it really changes the entire dynamic.
South Korean officials now say the mountain where Pyongyang detonated past nuclear devices is so destabilized, if another test is conducted, it could send up a dangerous cloud of radioactivity. The U.S. remains focused. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joe Dunford, meeting with regional counterparts in Hawaii. And Defense Secretary James Mattis with the South Korean defense chief, saying the U.S. was preparing military options.
Well, I cannot imagine, in light of Kim's expanded outlaw activities that the world's experienced, observed over this last year or two, I cannot imagine a condition under which the United States would accept North Korea as a nuclear power.
The Air Force sent its B-2 stealth bomber over the Pacific, according to the military, to keep the aircraft and air crews at a high state of readiness and proficiency, as Pyongyang reportedly conducted evacuation drills and blackout exercises near sensitive sites like missile launch pads, potential targets. All this ahead of President Trump's Asia tour, which begins at the end of the week. 5 countries to be visited, the crisis over North Korea very much on the top of the agenda. Brett?
Greg, thank you. We'll be taking a special report on the road next week. I'll be anchoring live from Asia as President Trump travels to the region. It all starts this coming Sunday with a bonus 6 p.m. Eastern edition of Special Report live from Tokyo, and then an exclusive interview with the Japanese Prime Minister Monday. Up next, the panel weighs in on the first charges out of the special counsel's office. First, beyond our borders tonight, Catalonia's president is in Brussels, possibly to seek asylum after fleeing Spain to avoid several charges, including rebellion. Spain's prime minister ordered the regional parliament's dissolution Friday as they tried to find a way out of the country's political crisis. An American teacher kidnapped in Afghanistan is said to be in poor health. A Taliban spokesman said that Kevin King is suffering from heart and kidney problems, and they will hold the U.S. government responsible if anything happens to him. King was kidnapped along with an Australian teacher outside American University in Kabul more than a year ago. Their abductors are offering a prisoner exchange for their freedom. Kenya's president will remain in power. The president's election was expected because he faced no significant challenge after the opposition leader refused to participate, saying the election was a sham. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. Right back with the panel after this.
President Donald Trump was correct. There is no evidence that Mr. Manafort or the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government.
Today's announcement has nothing to do with the president, has nothing to do with the president's campaign or campaign activity. There are no activities or official capacity in which the Trump campaign was engaged in any of these activities. Most of them took place well before the campaign ever even existed.
The indictments of Mr. Manafort and Mr. Gates show that the special counsel's probe is progressing in a very serious way. Mueller is moving forward.
Special counsel Robert Mueller and his team releasing the indictments today. First of Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, 12 counts in all: conspiracy against the United States, conspiracy to launder money, unregistered agent of a foreign principal, false and misleading Foreign Agents Registration Act statements, false statements, and 7 counts of failure to file reports of foreign bank and financial accounts. The president tweeted earlier today, before all of this, "Sorry, but this is years old." This is when the indictments first came out, before Paul Manafort was part of the Trump campaign. But why aren't crooked Hillary and the Dems the focus? Also, there is no collusion. The second part of the release today was about George Papadopoulos, who was by all accounts, a volunteer on the Trump campaign. But there you see in a national security meeting a couple of pictures from the Trump Instagram account, and he pled guilty October 5th to misleading statements to the FBI in this investigation. And I guess those were the eyebrow-raising developments today, because we don't know what he has done since he was arrested in July. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard; Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist; and Mo Alethi, executive director of the Georgetown Institute of Politics. Molly, your take.
Yeah, for people who have long reported on Paul Manafort's financial dealings, and that includes everyone from the Weekly Standard to the New York Times, today's news is mostly surprising for it just being 1 count of money laundering and then the associated violations of paperwork to go along with it. It does point to a larger bipartisan corruption problem with lobbying, but today's news doesn't have anything to do with the Russia-Trump collusion, which is the thing that Bob Mueller is supposed to be looking into. Now, if he is interested in people not doing a good job with registering their work on behalf of foreign governments and the election meddling, he's going to be very curious to look more into Fusion GPS, which is the firm that was hired by the Clintons, by the Clinton campaign and the DNC to run that Russia-Trump dossier operation. And there will be a lot to look into there that will be very interesting.
We should point out also developing today was that Tony Podesta, the Democratic lobbyist, left his firm that is named for him, and it is believed that he, in some capacity, is under investigation by the special counsel as well, perhaps along these ties to Manafort and Ukraine. Steve, your thoughts?
Well, this is the first step. We don't know. We know a lot more than we did a week ago. There's still a lot we don't know. The Manafort and Gates indictments, I think, if you read all 31 pages, if you had asked us a week ago to predict, based on what we'd read publicly about Paul Manafort and his business dealings, this is pretty much what we would have said, I think. Most of this was in the public record. The indictment added some new details to it, but I don't think we learned a ton. And as it relates to the Trump collusion narrative, Andy McCarthy, writing at National Review, said that the indictment appears to reaffirm former FBI Director James Comey's multiple assurances that Trump is not a suspect. Again, it's early. There's a lot more to learn. There's the possibility that Papadopoulos was wearing a wire. We know he was cooperative. This is the beginning of a long investigation, not the end. But this is probably a good day for Donald Trump on balance.
Here is the White House press secretary and the president's attorney on Papadopoulos.
I'd hardly call that some sort of regular advisor, or as you want to, push that he's like a senior member of the staff. He was not paid by the campaign. He was a volunteer on a council that met once.
I'm not concerned about it because if you look at what, again, George Papadopoulos's plea is, what the actual plea that he entered into was, again, a false statement about a timing as to when he talked to somebody about Russian activities. It wasn't, by the way, these weren't activities that were illegal. It wasn't the conversation that they had.
Mo.
The Papadopoulos, there's a lot of bad here today for the president. The Papadopoulos, I think, is the biggest blockbuster. Because while the plea was specifically for making a false statement, if you read the statement of offense, there's a lot in there that show collusion. It shows that he had regular engagement with Russian agents. It shows he took that engagement to his supervisors at the campaign. And while we heard the press secretary say that never went anywhere, I don't think that's exactly true. On August 15th, according to the statement of offense, on August 15th, a campaign supervisor encouraged him to take a trip to Russia for an off-the-record conversation about these emails that weren't even public that the Russians had yet. Quote, I would encourage you and another foreign policy advisor to, quote, make the trip if it is feasible. That's coming from a campaign supervisor.
That trip never took place, and in fact, campaign brass turned down meetings that he was trying to set up.
President.
Collusion doesn't mean, do you have a preference for a different policy toward Russia or a willingness to talk to Russians? It means conspiring to steal an election. Think what people are wanting when they've been told this narrative for a year. They want evidence that Trump committed treason, that he did something criminal or wrong to steal an election. Not that we all know that Trump has a different attitude toward Russia than other people because he said it publicly.
But that's not what the statement of offense purported. The statement of offense said that Papadopoulos knew that the Russians had tens of thousands of emails that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton. They offered them to Papadopoulos. Papadopoulos suggested to the campaign that they engage with this, and while the campaign said, according to the statement of offense, the candidate's not going to take this meeting, his supervisor encouraged him to go to Russia to take this meeting, not to talk policy, but to talk about opposition research that the Russian government had on Hillary Clinton.
I think there's an important distinction to be made here. I think what we see in the Papadopoulos indictment, and what we've seen several other times, is a willingness to collude. That's different than collusion. If the case is collusion, I don't think that we have it. I don't think that it's in the Papadopoulos indictment, and I don't think that it's in the public record right now.
If people care about collusion, then they should be really interested in the hiring of Fusion GPS, which is a Russia-linked firm that was getting sourced from the Kremlin and other Russian operatives to run an information campaign against the opponent. So if they're interested in that, and if they do think that's collusion, well, that's something you should look into. If it's just opposition research, then that's just something both parties were involved in.
You go back to the beginning of this. One of the questions that I had, I think one of the questions that a lot of people had as this got underway was, why did so many people in Trump world, why were they unwilling or incapable of telling the truth about contacts with Russians? That was one of the big questions, and it was a fair question.
It is a fair question, and they are in trouble, many of them, at least from what we read in these documents, for false statements. Now, it's important to point out, to Molly's point, there was not a federal investigation of the Clinton funding of Fusion GPS, hence they were not lying to federal investigators, so they don't have charges of lying to feds.
Right, although they're reportedly looking into Tony Podesta. But my point is a narrow one. The question about why so many people in Trump world were incapable or unwilling to tell the truth arose, and the question was, are they hiding collusion? If not, what are they hiding? Let me finish my point for a second. The point is, could they have simply been hiding attempts to collude? Because we now know that there were several attempts to collude, whether you're talking about Cambridge Analytica, whether you're talking about Papadopoulos, whether you're talking about Donald Trump Jr., whether you're talking about Paul Manafort and his willingness to brief Putin cronies about these things. It seems to me that there were several attempts to collude. What we have not yet seen is evidence of actual collusion right now. I don't think that's in the Papadopoulos indictment, and I don't think we've seen it yet.
All right, I'm going to call an audible because there's more to talk about here. So we're going to talk about this after a quick break.
about it, other than nothing's going to derail what we're doing in Congress, because we're working on solving people's problems.
House Speaker asked about indictments and the developments today, saying that tax reform is still full speed ahead, and we'll see if that's the case. Democrats, meantime, talking about making sure that the president doesn't or can't fire the special counsel, and also that essentially, if he decides to pardon somebody, that will have a bipartisan reaction from Capitol Hill. We're back with the panel. Steve, just to finish your thought, we're getting ready to see Facebook up on the Hill tomorrow. There's still a lot of focus here on what Russia did on social media. You mentioned Cambridge Analytics. Just perspective, big picture. I mean, Facebook said there's $150,000 were spent over 2 years. Right. Both campaigns spent tens of millions of dollars on social media. I mean, $150,000, you couldn't move Michigan with $150,000.
No, and small companies spend $150,000 on Facebook. I think hopefully these hearings will give us that bigger perspective that you're talking about, so we can actually see, was this part of a broader influence campaign? What was it meant to do? Were they using social media in targeted ways that would have had an effect on the campaign, or how people were thinking about the campaign? I think that's a very important discussion. I think we'll get more information about that. The bigger picture is Russia's getting lost in this debate. Between all the finger pointing back and forth, Russia's trying to influence our elections. They've been doing it for years, not just in 2016. They've been doing it for years, but they've stepped up their efforts. It's dangerous. We need to be taking a forward look about how we can prevent this in 2018 and 2020, and there's too little discussion on that.
Yeah. Is there a feeling in Democratic circles that this is going to have Democratic tentacles as well, beyond Tony Podesta?
Look, I think Democrats, and what's been encouraging to me since last year, the number of folks out there who say, look, an attack on one party is an attack on both, right? An attack on the DNC is an attack on the Republican Party, and vice versa. And I don't think there's any question that Russians were trying to sow chaos in our electoral process on both sides. I think that's very true. On the Facebook point, I do want to make one important note, and that is today, just today, yeah, $150,000, but that goes a long way on social media. And today, Facebook announced that Russian-backed content was seen by 126 million Americans. That's a third of the United States population. We're seeing on Facebook content that came from the Russians. So it is deep, right? I don't think it's just a negligible, buy. I think this is deep, and I'm with you.
I mean, if you can sway an election with 150 grand, that is going to be something.
That would be something, right? That would absolutely be something.
Molly, I want to turn really quickly. We don't have a lot of time, but there was a hearing on AUMF, authorization for the military force. It's a big issue. We're going to continue to cover it, but your thoughts about it?
Well, as James Madison wrote to Thomas Jefferson, the brilliance of our Constitution is that it puts war authority with Congress precisely because the executive branch is most interested in war authority. We are operating under these old resolutions that are from 2001, 2002, far more than twice as long as the Gulf of Tonkin resolutions. A new authority needs to be put in place. It needs to have a time limit. It needs geographic limit. It needs transparency. These are the problems that we've seen from these old agreements, and hopefully we will finally get an updated authority that's not decades old.
But also does not tie the hands of the president to act as he does in an executive way.
You can actually have multiple authorizations of force, though. Just because we've been operating on these two for so long doesn't mean that you couldn't have one for each theater.
All right. I promise you we're going to talk about that topic. I wanted to get it in. When we come back, thank you, panel, how it feels to be 94 years young. Finally tonight, one woman celebrated her birthday at New Heights. Isla Campbell celebrated her 94th birthday by jumping from a plane alongside her granddaughter and great-granddaughter. Campbell says she loved the free fall. Look at that. She said the experience was one she had to take now.
Age, this old, I figured I'll never make it for another year. Better do it now. I loved it, and I'll do it again.
Something tells me she's going to be jumping at 95. Thanks for inviting us in your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. A lot of news these days. And guess what? The story, hosted by my colleague Martha McCallum, starts right now with the live handoff.
Hello
a new tradition.
There, and I've got it. Thank you, Brett. Thanks so much. Busy Monday. We pick up the story from here.